Welcome to Taking the Myth, your topical, skeptical discussion show. I'm Stephen Knight, and joining me to go through all the big topics is Iram Ramzan. Hello.
Hello, Stephen.
How the hell are you?
I'm not too bad. How about you?
Yeah, great. And should we do the usual obligatory joke about how quiet it's been?
Yep, it has been very quiet.
Excellent. Tick that one off. So, we're both fellow Manx. It's been quite a big week for people living in the northwest of England and just the country in general, and I think globally people have reacted to it. Before we get into the doom and gloom of that, I thought we'd touch on a few positives. You're currently fundraising. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Right. Well, some people who listen to the podcast might be aware that I'm going on a trek in northern Pakistan, in non-Taliban areas, might I add. So I'm not going to come back some sort of jihadist. Don't worry. I've never done anything like this before, and I wasn't initially going to do it for charity, but then I thought, why not? Because I'm sure many people will be interested in what I'm doing, and a lot of people will be interested in giving as well. So I picked a charity that provides free education for mostly girls in Pakistan in very hard to reach areas, because in countries like Pakistan, if you're poor, then you really can't afford an education, and if you're a girl as well, your family are less likely to send you to school or keep you on at school. Many girls drop out to stay at home and then to get married. And, the whole point of charities like this is to provide an education for them so that they don't drop off the radar, so they can get an education. So I decided to do my trek to raise money for this particular charity. It's called DIL. And they've got a branch in London, in the UK. And so far, my initial target was £500, and I thought I would struggle to get 500. So imagine my surprise when I smashed that target within 12 hours. So I decided to increase it up to 1,000 and smash that again. So now I'm on about 1,800, just over 1,800. And I'm keeping the fundraising page open until I come back, I think. So hopefully, with everyone's support, I'll be able to raise a lot of money for this charity. And the money goes directly to the charity because I've set it up on Just Giving, so it does not go into my pockets. As awesome as that would be, to have £1,800, it's not. It's going straight to the charity. Yeah,
well done. That's fantastic. I know what you're saying about, because whenever I've done a charitable drive, I always make sure it's digitally and electronic, so it's open so everyone can see. It's not just me, spending it all on hookers and cocaine. I don't know why that came to my mind. I'd probably put it on something a little bit more. Anyway, moving on swiftly. So where can people find your Just Giving page?
Well, if you look on my Twitter profile, I've pinned it right at the top. And also, if you want to go directly to the website, it's justgiving.com/Iram Ramzan. So you should be able to find it there.
Awesome.
Yes.
And on Twitter at Iram_Ramzan. All right, so I think we're best off moving on to the big one. Manchester terror attack, Manchester Arena. For the uninitiated, Manchester Arena I think it's the largest indoor arena in the UK, and it's the second largest in the EU. I think during the pop concert where this suicide attack happened, I think there were 21,000 people present, or that's the capacity.
Wow.
And I woke up to the news. I actually fell asleep before it was reported, and I wasn't necessarily surprised to see there'd been a terror attack in Manchester. I think this has been in the post for a while. Unfortunately, we've had people arrested for scoping out local shopping centres and actually planning to carry out acts of terrorism in the area before. I think, well, what I was surprised with really was the target. I kind of expected it'd be, like I've mentioned, a shopping mall or maybe a football match. I wasn't really prepared for it to be mostly teenage girls. So I think The death toll stands at around 22 last time I checked now. Over 60 people injured. 19 of those, I believe, are critical. When did you hear about the news?
It was the same as you. I woke up to the news on Tuesday morning because I decided to have a very early night on Monday. And I'm glad I did. I don't think I would have slept otherwise. So I woke up and there were messages on my phone from people asking me if I was okay.
Yeah,
I thought,
same.
What's happened? Did I do something, you know? And that's when I saw it on the news. I thought, you know, terrorist attacks happen everywhere else. You expect to hear it in Paris or Istanbul, Lahore, Pakistan, but you know, and I know we've mentioned this on the podcast several times before that you never know where it could happen. It could happen here, but I still did not expect it. I still didn't expect it, and especially at a concert where there were so many children as well. I mean, what an absolute cunt.
Yes.
Don't give a shit. An absolute fucking cunt for doing that to innocent people, especially children.
As soon as it was confirmed that it was I mean, the thing about Manchester Arena is that I don't know how many times I've been there. I've been there I used to go, I don't know if you remember this far back, you young'uns, but it originally opened as a hockey rink for Manchester Storm. Manchester had a hockey team.
All right.
And I used to watch them.
Don't remember.
Yeah, never mind. I used to watch them play there, and I've seen, you know, live stage shows. I've seen bands. I've seen comedians. I've lost count the amount of gigs I've actually been to at that venue, and just to see it happen. I go through there every day to get to work as well, and it hits home in a way, because it is home, that it doesn't elsewhere. But as soon as it was confirmed that it was a suicide bombing, I immediately said, well, Muslim, male, early 20s, British.
Oh, now you're just being Islamophobic.
Turns out, Muslim, early 20s, British, male.
No, but he wasn't real Muslim. That's what you're forgetting. He killed people, so he obviously can't be a real Muslim. He didn't know anything about Islam. You know, he wasn't practicing. He wasn't devout. Ergo, got nothing to do with the religion.
Didn't do nothing. Okay, so the suspect, Salman Abedi.
Was he a lone wolf? Was he a lone nutter?
Well, that's the interesting thing, because that's what we're talking about again. And there are currently 14 people in custody in relation to this. Plenty of raids across Manchester, various areas of Manchester. I don't even think Wigan's been involved. Rusholme, Trafford, Salford. There's been police flying by every 2 minutes when I've been working in the city centre. So there've been 14 arrests, because you can't really put something together like that on your own, really. You need help. There's this sort of idea as well that these are self-radicalised via the internet on YouTube, and that's
sorry, no.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of I fell into that trap a while back. I sort of thought that, I mean, internet does play a big part, but if that were the case, you'd see an even spread of jihadists across the map. And that's not true. I mean, I've been reading Graham Wood's book about the ISIS fighters and their networks, and you tend to find them cluster in particular areas where there's a prominent, known, charismatic recruiter.
Yeah, we've seen in the news after the Westminster terror attack, you know, that I forgot his name. Was it Khalid Masood? He had links up in Birmingham and Manchester, and it's the same with all these other terrorist attacks. Those girls that went off to join ISIS, the two Somalian girls. I think they were saying there was another link there. Ronald Fiddler, I can't remember what his Islamic name was when he converted, but Ronald Fiddler, he married to a woman from Oldham, but then he lived in Moss Side, and he was also connected. So they are all connected in some way. So for people then to just dismiss them as lone nutters or lone wolves is just simply not true. You know, the lone wolf attack is actually quite rare, and this incident doesn't really seem to fit any of the criteria of being a lone wolf attack at all. Yeah,
I agree, and I think that's a narrative that needs bidding straight away. And luckily, it's not one that our authorities are really taken by, obviously, given the amount of arrests they've made. It just seems to be our politicians and, you know, talking heads that speak in this way. But, I mean, a little bit of background on this guy. He's British born, 22 years old, I believe. Salman Abedi, the son of Libyan parents who I believe actually fled Libya to escape Gaddafi's regime, and given all the benefits and opportunities you could hope for, certainly much better than they would have had in their home country. And you mean
so he wasn't disenfranchised or a victim of racism or, marginalized by society?
He went to Salford University. I mean, my sister studied at Salford University, and it's not everybody. You'll know people your age who just didn't have the opportunity to go to university. Either they didn't get the grades or they didn't have the financial support available to do it. It's not common. I mean, most of my best friends didn't actually go to university, actually. And to be able to go to university like in this way, it's not somebody who's completely cast out from society, who has no opportunities. There is a path you have to travel to get there, and it doesn't involve being shunned and oppressed by society. There's no possible way you can get to university via that route. So, I mean, he dropped out, evidently. It seemed like he had other interests, as we've since found out. But I'm sick of this narrative now about people still asking us how we managed to fail this person. And I really think we should be asking how someone like this managed to fail British society in such an horrific way.
I think that is a better question, rather than how society failed them. How has he failed society? You're right. He had all the opportunities, as you said, but I think people seem to be, rather perplexed, because they're saying, oh, but his family fled Libya. This made no sense. But, you don't necessarily have to be some sort of secularist to oppose Gaddafi, just because you oppose a dictator doesn't necessarily mean you believe in democracy or that you're non-religious. All sorts of people with all sorts of views will oppose a dictator. I mean, look at Egypt. Mubarak's opposed by Islamists over there as well. So, and I think he worshipped at Didsbury Mosque, where
Yes.
I think his dad used to do the call for prayer, and I think his other brother went there as well. But I think the mosque was saying we don't really have any recollection of him. But then they're saying, we kind of do in a way, because he didn't like a speech that we made and we reported him to the authorities. Don't know if that's true.
No, well, I heard they said they'd kicked him out the mosque, but they didn't report him. I'll have to double check that.
I've heard a few different.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the truth is on that. But
Yeah.
I've also heard reports that his father has got links to Al Qaeda. His brother apparently knew of the attacks, or knew they was going to happen.
I think they've both been arrested in Libya.
Yeah, and his sister has refused to condemn the attack. And not, she seems almost supportive of the actions that he's taken.
I think she probably is.
Yeah, so it's a shit show from every single angle, and I think it's a disgrace that good, decent people are asking what they could have done to have prevented this, when we've been let down by these horrible, ideologically motivated people. Oh, and there's another thing I wanted to bring up. That the Muslim purity test is making the news yet again. We're being told, and they never do this with Christians, they never do this with anyone from any other culture or religion, but if it's a Muslim in the news, unless that Muslim adheres to the conservative, hardline version of Islam, then even secular newspapers and secular journalists will say, well, the Muslim credentials are not good enough. So in this case, they're focusing in on the fact that this Salman Abedi smoked cannabis. Now,
well, that's it. Is disowned completely.
But I always thought that was kind of an Islamic loophole anyway, because when growing up, and I had Muslim friends, some from Pakistan, some from Saudi Arabia, and they all smoked weed, but they didn't drink.
All of them, yeah, they all smoke weed. Look, we need to. There are things that, I've said this before to people. There are things that just because Muslims do something doesn't necessarily make it Islamic, and then vice versa.
Yeah.
Just because they, either smoke or drink or, even have girlfriends doesn't stop them being Muslim if they believe they're Muslim. And just because they smoke weed doesn't automatically stop this guy being a Muslim. A lot of Muslims do things that Islamically might be prohibited, but they still believe they're Muslims and they still believe in the faith. I mean, it's like with the ringleader of the Rochdale grooming gang. We'll come on to that later on. But, you know, he apparently used to, you know, after he used to rape those girls, he used to go home apparently and pray for forgiveness and atonement. So just because they do something doesn't necessarily stop them from believing in the faith, because they still do believe in it. They still identify as Muslims as well. And I'm sorry, but what if he were a conservative, hardline Muslim who prayed 5 times a day and then blew something up? What would they say then?
Yeah.
Oh, he only prayed 5 times a day. He didn't do the supplementary prayers afterwards, you know. It's not that devout. For goodness sake.
And also there's the big martyrdom aspect of this as well that people don't tend to consider. It's almost a get out of jail free card, isn't it? If you've sinned your entire life and then you take out a few infidels in the act of martyrdom, the act of jihad, holy war, and all of a sudden the slate's wiped clean and Bob's your uncle, 72 virgins. And that's a very powerful narrative for a lot of people who are taken in by this doctrine of martyrdom. So either way you look at it, all things point to the ideology, unfortunately. I'm not sure how much there is to say on this now. I mean, I think it'll come up again later when we talk about the ASLANs. Well,
I just wanted to point out, actually, you know, I was having a conversation with an ex-Muslim friend, actually, and he was saying that this idea of becoming a martyr is glorified. And it really is. That, you know, whenever you ask what is the best way to die, the standard response is, oh, as a martyr, that's seen as the best way to die, you know, for God and in the duty of God as well. So, I mean, some of these views are not necessarily on the fringe or extreme. Like a conversation as well that I was having, we were talking about when we used to go to mosque and we used to be taught that music is haram and then going to concerts is wrong. You know, my friend was saying that he was taught in the afterlife, if you've been listening to music, you'll have lead poured down your ear as punishment.
Ouch.
And that's not even seen as a fringe view. It's seen as normative. That's why when you listen to Islamic songs, they very rarely have musical instruments. They'll just be a drum and they'll just be mostly vocal. There's hardly any music in them because I think it's wrong. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying that just because you think music's wrong, you're going to go blow up a concert full of people, but there's this, you know, there's this culture of raising, you know, your children or teaching them with certain views where they'll hold other people in contempt and where they'll end up that, I don't know, they'll feel a bit torn between the West and, you know, their core Muslim values, because, you know, you're living in the West where pretty much anything is allowed, and then on the other hand you're being told, well, no, you can't do this, that and that because we Muslims don't do that. That's how non-Muslims behave and we mustn't imitate them.
Haram.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that just because you believe those views that necessarily means you are going to go and kill somebody. But even if that doesn't lend to somebody, you know, growing up to become a suicide bomber, you're still raising a generation where they're going to end up with conflicted views or holding other people in contempt because they don't believe what you believe, because what they believe will lead to them going to hell or something. Yes, I think it's a really serious topic, and I think people really need to start thinking about what they're teaching their children in mosques or at homes. And I know a lot of Muslims are quite well integrated and they do manage to find a good balance, but then, you know, there are some that aren't, and we do still have a problem with integration in this country as well. And I don't see how we're moving beyond that. I think this new generation is looking to become more religious and looking at a more so-called pure version of the faith. And I know people are going to, some Muslims have criticized me for what I've said before, because I wrote a piece in the Sunday Times about this, and it was only Muslims who were criticizing what I said. I mean, there were a lot more who were actually quite supportive, but the only criticism was coming from some conservative Muslims who seemed to think that I was just blaming all of Islam or blaming all of Muslims or being Islamophobic, which is just ridiculous. I'm not. And the problem is that, it's all well and nice having all these messages of solidarity, and they're great to see. They really are. And it just goes to show you what a great country we live in, especially up in Manchester. I didn't see any of that in London, nowhere near on that scale as we've seen in Manchester. We've not seen, what we've seen in Manchester has been absolutely great, but, that's all well and good. But in the meantime, we have a massive problem on our hand, and then these messages of solidarity can only get us so far. We do need to stick together, yes, and we need to fight this problem all together. But then that also means that Muslim communities need to admit that there's a problem, in their own communities. Otherwise, how are we going to deal with it? You can't just distance yourself from someone like Salman Abedi and say he's got nothing to do with us. Well, he does. He was a Muslim. He's from a Muslim community. You can't dismiss somebody like him and say, we've washed our hands of him. He's an extremist. He doesn't represent us, doesn't represent our religion. That's it. We're done. Doesn't work like that.
Well, an example of something that speaks to what you were just talking about having to, a foot in two different worlds, really, the kind of Western almost hedonism that some people see, and these ideas being reinforced in the community of, restrictions, haram, things like that. I don't know if you saw on Question Time, there was a representative from Didsbury Mosque there. I think it was, it was a woman. And she was saying that, people are welcome to come to the mosque and visit and see what it's all about and, discover that it's not some sort of hotbed of extremism. And then some chap in the crowd put his hand up and said, well, actually, I did just that the other Sunday. And he pulled...
Hang on a minute, I did that.
Yeah, and he pulled a leaflet out, and that was being handed out there to people turning up. And it was explicit in the way it was denouncing the West and saying that, the Westerners are in sin. And, it basically said you should not mix with people in the West. It was almost creating a us and them narrative, and I don't think that's something Britain does as a whole. Britain, wider society, I think, is quite tolerant and accepting. There are problems, sure. There, racism didn't just go away overnight. Othering people and prejudice didn't just go away after the 1980s. That's still a big problem. But when that does happen, this country closes that shit down pretty quickly. There is outroar. If you're a person of colour and you get racially abused on public transport and somebody films that's going viral. That's going to be in every newspaper across the country. Police are going to get involved, and it's going to be a scandal. And that is not what happens in racist societies. But the fact that the mosques are encouraging this othering and anti-Western sentiment, I think, is the bigger problem. Another quick thing I want to say is, and we touched on Manchester, I'm not patriotic in any sense, really. I'm certainly not a champion of being northern. I think it's a little bit silly sometimes to wear that with pride. But this last week, spending all my time in the city with people and just seeing how I'm going to sound like Jeremy Corbyn now, seeing how they've actually come together and got off their arse and done something, just random acts of kindness. I think some of the first responders to the injured after the attack were homeless men. I've got police in my family. They're saying they're arriving, because they're on 13-hour shifts now. They've had all the leave cancelled. They're arriving in Manchester and saying that just random members of the public are coming up to them and buying them breakfast. You have, places like Domino's turning up to hospitals with 60 pizzas and things like that. And it's just little things, because they can't, take back what's happened. They can't prevent that now, but they're just all chipping in to try and make life a little bit easier for those who have still got a job to do.
No, I think you're absolutely right. We've seen every section of the community come together all the week, and like I said, it has been great to see, and we've seen more solidarity even with Muslim citizens as well. And I know there have been some disgusting incidents where that surgeon who was treating the victims was, told to fuck off back home, called a Paki or something like that.
I hadn't heard this.
I think that's just yeah, it was a couple of days ago. I think it's just despicable that, somebody will be treated like that. And it really saddens me when people can't differentiate between what a terrorist has done and the ordinary Muslim on the street who's had no involvement in this whatsoever. So I've had a couple of incidents where, Muslims have had some abuse thrown at them. But on the whole, I think it's not been that bad. And it really frustrates me when people talk about this backlash against Muslims. I don't see a backlash.
No.
If a few name-calling incidents is a backlash, then I don't see a backlash.
Yeah.
It's a very poor backlash.
Yeah, it's rubbish backlash, shit backlash. But,
Come on, Manchester.
Obviously, we should keep our eyes open for these things and be very cautious and look after people who are, at the end of the day, minorities. But it's when this backlash narrative becomes the main focus, everyone feels they need to talk about it and make it the main thing, that really pisses me off. But I think we might get to that in a bit more detail. There's one last thing I want to mention about this Manchester attack before we move on. These well-intentioned people who will say things like, well, he's failed, this guy, this Salman Abedi, he's failed in his goals because people went to work the next day, and Manchester will continue to plod on, which is right. But I think they're not understanding his goals. That man had one goal. This is a theological problem we need to combat. He thought that by slaughtering innocents, infidels in his mind, in an act of jihad, in an act of martyrdom, he had safe passage to paradise. That's what he wanted to achieve, and he left this planet thinking that he'd achieved it moments before he dropped off into oblivion. So I think in order to really combat these people, we need to combat this narrative of martyrdom for paradise. And I don't see any reformist alternative to that being preached in mosques. I think it's going to be very difficult for imams, community leaders et al. To say, actually, paradise isn't achieved through martyrdom, because that seems like an explicit part of Islamic doctrine to me.
Well, what they'll say is that suicide bombings are absolutely wrong, they're haram, there's no excuses for them, there's no excuse for killing innocent people. So that's how they teach them. They'll say that is wrong. But I'm guessing people who are already radicalized or extremists are not necessarily going to go to their local mosque and speak to their imam. Some of them probably won't really know anything that much about the theology. So some do, to be fair, but some of them, might just be like Uncle G from back home in Pakistan or Bangladesh, who is totally out of his depth, just knows absolutely nothing about modern Britain. But then you get these more learned ones who can speak English as well, who do know their theology. But then when you're teaching them as well that God's law comes first, what do you expect? I mean, obviously, I don't think that there are mosques out there teaching children, if someone's not following God's law, you go and kill them or blow them up. Obviously, violence, as far as I'm aware, has always been condemned and it's never been taught. But then if in the same sentence you're saying that, we follow God's law first, as long as it doesn't... I think it's a case of, yeah, you follow the law of this land, but then there's also a question of what God says and what the Quran says as well, because don't forget, in this country, same-sex marriage is legal, but Islamically we're told that is wrong. And I think about over 100 imams signed an open letter opposing the Equality Act towards marriage. So there's always going to be a conflict there. And if you're teaching them that, God's laws come first, what do you expect when somebody decides to take it upon themselves to go and dole out punishments to those who don't follow?
I think It's time for the ASLAN Awards.
There's this misconception that people derive their values from their scriptures.
Who goes to hell?
Gays, fags, hundreds and hundreds of Jews.
You identify yourself as gay. Why don't you then choose to be Muslim when it says explicitly in Judeo-Christian tradition that is prohibited?
There's this misconception that people derive their values from their scripture.
The ASLANs.
Now, the ASLANs are an award given to an apologist spouting lies and nonsense, and I have two nominees, and I think you might agree with me on them both. I'm not sure who's going to win. It might come down to a coin toss, but I wanted to speak a little bit about a gentleman called Muhammed Ullah. Seems we have a Mo problem quite frequently on this podcast. Mo problems, Mo problems. Hashtag. So, I don't know if you saw, I made my live TV debut the other week, BBC Big Questions. Wasn't shitting myself at all.
You spoke very well, if you don't mind me saying. You're very, very calm and you made some excellent points.
Thank you, Iram. Check, he's in the post.
And you're in the centre as well. OMG.
Yeah.
You're right there, slap bang in the middle.
That's
and
it.
So is he right behind you.
I've just got so much dirt on the BBC, that's why. I demanded my moment of fame. It was great experience, lovely experience in fact, once it was over. But just to explain a little bit about what happened, I mean the clips, if you live in the UK, I think it's still on BBC iPlayer. I know there are some clips floating around on my blog and YouTube as well, but I was sat down front and centre, and there was a Muslim chap sat behind me who's since become ubiquitous, kind of stole my thunder. Now, what many of you probably wouldn't know is that about 20 or so minutes before the show goes live, 10 o'clock on the dot, live broadcast, they have a little bit of a practice debate just to check the technical side of things. So all the people on the front row are mic'd up, they've got a little lapel mic. Everyone else from behind them, from the second row onwards, no microphone. So if they want to contribute, they have to put their hand up, and some guy swings in with a boom mic, you know, one of them big sticks, one of them big poles and a mic on the end. So they're doing a little practice question, and Nikki's asking about Theresa May versus Corbyn, and we're all chiming in, we're all giving our 10 cents. Now, sat next to me is a journalist, a writer, Angela Epstein, I believe she's called. I know.
Yeah, she writes for the Daily Mail, doesn't she?
Yeah, so that became.
So we can't take anything she says seriously now.
If there's one thing
dismissed by Angela.
Yeah, that's it. If there's one thing I learned from that appearance, it's that she writes for the Daily Mail, basically. So I don't know anything about her writing. I don't really know much about her views on things, but all I know is my personal interactions with her. So in the green room beforehand, she was very pleasant. Came and sat. I'm invited to sit down to my table. We had a little chat, a little back and forth. She seemed lovely and pleasant. She was nice during the show, she made me giggle a few times, whispering things to me, and she was nice afterwards, so I've got no complaints about her personally. But our Muslim friend sat behind me, Muhammed Ullah, he went.
I like how you said that. You're like, practically spat out his name, Muhammed Ullah.
Muhammed Ullah. But I've got a few other names for him as well, which I'm sure we'll get to. But he was sat directly behind me. Now, this is in the rehearsal, so this isn't even being broadcast. He went for Angela straight away. She got to speak. It's something to do with Corbyn or May, and he jumps in, hand up, starts raising his voice, and the man with the microphone comes in. And we're still just checking sound levels, and he said words to the effect of like, "As a Jewish woman, you should be ashamed to write for the Daily Mail." And then she's like, "How dare you bring my Jewishness into this?" And
right.
And I kept bearing in mind, I'm quite nervous, and I thought this would be an opportunity to settle nerves. Just have a little giggle, ha ha ha. And these two are shouting at each other. He's shouting over my head. She's turning around, shouting back at him. Nicky Campbell's got the producer in his ear at this point, saying, 60 seconds till broadcast, blah, blah. And Nicky's like, shush to this guy. And we're about to go live, and he's like, shush. And he had to, tell him to be quiet. So that was the first introduction to this obnoxious twat. And then, it starts, the episode's going as planned, and it gets to my section about whether it's okay to be offended. Do we have the right not to be offended is the question. And you can see this. Nicky Campbell's reading the autocue and he's talking about Stephen Fry, and he mentions how Stephen Fry called God, one of the most capricious characters, blah, blah, blah. And this guy's tutting and shaking his head behind me. You can see me turning around to look at him, but you can't hear him at home because he's not got a mic.
Did you give him a death glare?
I give him about 4 death glares. 2 of them actually made it into the show. I'm thinking of making a video on this, so I'll put it up. But he was clapping in my ear all on purpose. He was tutting, sighing all the time. So it comes to my section to speak, and I'm asked about safe spaces. Does anyone have the right to a safe space? Now, my answer to that's no. I loathe safe spaces. I think they're ridiculous. But I decided there's a way I could work ex-Muslims into this question. I was determined to get ex-Muslims in on the BBC. So I said, well, if anyone's got a shout for it, it's ex-Muslims, because I wanted to go on to say, there's a difference between genuine safety concerns and just trying to safeguard your ideological echo chambers. And
yeah, but that bald twat just ruined your moment, didn't he?
Muhammed Ullah back bobblehead jumped straight in. Again, so this is I'm trying to speak. This is my first time speaking on TV. He interrupts, calls what I'm saying nonsense. So I turn around then and I'm ready for him. And but you should see his face at the first mention of ex-Muslim. He's shaking his head, he's disagreeing with everything I'm saying, and he pipes up that it's nonsense that ex-Muslims might warrant some extra concerns, given how they're either slaughtered in various other countries or ostracised from their own families and communities in Britain. And his reasoning for this was, well, an ex-Muslim group came to his university and he sat in and everything was fine. What do you think? Conclusive? Closed and shut case?
Well, what more is there to say?
Yeah. So
good grief. I've seen him before. I mean, when I was in the audience of the Big Questions last year, and he was also in the audience just 2-3 chairs away from me, and the question was about the British Empire. And he wanted compensation for the British Empire, and I really wanted to say something to him. I was like, "Why? Sorry, you weren't even born during the British Empire. I doubt even your parents were born during the Empire. What exactly do you want compensation for? Because as horrific as some of the actions were of." Some of the British that went around the world. Overall, I don't think you've done too badly, Muhammad. You live in the UK, you've got a cushy life. You go to university. You're a chaplain. That's what he does. He's a chaplain at the Manchester University. I don't think the British Empire did you that much harm. If you were living in Pakistan, you'd probably be driving a tractor right about now. I don't know. Well, but you don't need compensation.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing as well. So he'd whinge that, I don't know why he did this, but he whinged that the word Islamist had been brought up a few times.
But he's a perpetual whinger. That's what he does. He whinges a lot, and he goes on and on about how he's a victim and how all Muslims are victim. He's just a professional victim, when there's actually nothing much for him to complain about.
Well, he loves the sound of his own voice. He got annoyed that somebody mentioned Islamist, which is weird. Why is he annoyed that people are slagging off Islamists? Second, he was saying that I have to just sit here and take this. I have to just sit here and take it. Well, no, you're actually responding. The largest broadcaster in Britain right now. You're having your say. So what more does he expect? What more does he think he's entitled to? Censorship? Some sort of legal action?
Maybe he just wants to be Sultan of the Caliphate or something. I don't know.
So at this point, he mentions anti-Muslim bigotry, and they have it much worse than ex-Muslims. They're always in the press and they're getting attacked left, right, and centre. So at this point, you can't see it because I'm slightly off camera, but I'm waving furiously at Nicky Campbell to bring me back in, and thankfully he does. So I managed to just make the point that he, any prejudice he faces based on misconceptions about him, based on his skin colour or his Arabic name or the perception that he's a Muslim. A lot of Sikhs have to put up with this as well. Ex-Muslims have this as well. So it's kind of a double-barrel problem for them. But he also at one point as well, and it's annoying because he was dropping so much shit comment-wise every time someone spoke, and only I could hear him in my ear. So there's at one point that Angela Epstein, who he really didn't like, they were talking about, you know, being wolf whistled in the street and how she doesn't find it offensive, and ideally she'd like to hear more wolf whistles. And then this fucking bobblehead pipes up with, "You'll be waiting a long time." So first of all, God. He's attacked her based on the fact she's Jewish. Now he's attacking her based on what he perceives her looks to mean. You know, it's almost like he's not a very nice guy.
It seems that way, doesn't it?
But luckily, Iram, after the show had finished, I was able to draw a line under it secure in the knowledge that I'll never have to see him again. Because he's just dropped off the face of the earth, hasn't he?
Yeah. He's been everywhere. He's been every fucking where.
He's even been on CNN.
Just capitalising on this atrocity, just, you know, to get a name in the media.
I'm calling what he and Mo Shafiq have been up to officially, and I'm going to get them T-shirts. I'm going to call it the Manchester Murder Terror Tour 2017. I don't know who's going to make them T-shirts for me, but I'm gonna send one to the Ramadan Foundation and one to Manchester University for them too, and just with pictures of all the media they've been soaking up this last week. Terrorism is good business for these people.
They have absolutely no shame. Like, people have died, and they're just thinking about how they can make a big profile for themselves. Mo Shafiq, especially, every time there's some sort of Islamic-related incident, there he is. And now we've got two bald Mo's now in the media. So if we lose one, we've got a backup.
Got backup, spare
We've
Mo.
already lost Mo Ansar. We've got Mo Allah and Mo Shafiq. And you know, this is Mo Shafiq, who, as some of our regular listeners will know, he's supportive of blasphemy laws, as far as I can tell. He tried to set a mob on Majid Nawaz for tweeting a cartoon, called him Gustaki Rasul, which means defamer of the Prophet. And when you call somebody that, it's like a death sentence, especially in Pakistan. And that probably means someone like Majid can never go to Pakistan ever again.
Yep.
So this is, and then this person is being hailed as some sort of moderate or something.
Well, there has been some progress on that front, because I don't know if you noticed. I mean, I was getting a bit pissed off with this, and I was actually looking for Mo Shafiq every time I went somewhere because I was walking around St Anne's Square, St Peter's Square, places where there were a lot of vigils in Manchester, and because I kept seeing his little bald head popping up everywhere, and I was looking at, because I felt like confronting him and just asking the question, why are you here standing up against extremism when you promote extremism, you endorse, advertise, support and rub shoulders with extremists, you bald-headed fucking... So...
Let's not be baldest now.
Okay, I've got
not
full...
All baldies.
Yeah, not all baldies, not all slapheads. So... What I did notice as well, Channel 5 had announced that they were going to talk to him on the news in the evening, and I just had enough, and so I was tweeting, I was like, look, do you know this about him? Do you know that? I was tweeting all the Channel 5 Twitter accounts, not to no platform him, just to ask him, can you challenge him on these things, please? If you want, I'll ring up and do it. You know, just somebody needs to talk to him. And I actually got a response back from one of the producers saying, thanks for the information. And I mean, I'll have to find the tweet where it is, but... it was something to the words of going forward, you know, we'll keep it in mind, or we won't make the mistake again. So there's progress. So someone's seen what there is online about him and decided that he's not worth having again. So as well, to mention this Muhammed Ullah, what we're referring to as well, he's been on like the Victoria Derbyshire programme. He ended up on Channel 4. He managed to end up on Question Time. Somebody sent him a tweet congratulating him on his appearance on CNN. I've not seen that one. So... we've got this, and I want to clear up a little bit of something, because there are people on the far, or not necessarily far right, on the right, they seem to me, but they're propagating this, this conspiracy now, that there's some big BBC conspiracy to plant him. He's the liberal, whatever, part of the liberal narrative that the BBC are pushing, and it doesn't work like that. Having been in the audience of these programmes, I mean, you've been in the audience of BBC Big Questions as well. I don't know if you've ever been to a Question Time filming.
And I always get emails now about it, saying if I'm interested in taking part. So if you've been on once before and you've been a contributor, or if you've asked a question or something like that, then you'll get an email automatically. You know, they'll remember you and they'll invite you back. Yeah. And
it's the same production company. Yeah. It's Mentorn. Yeah. And what they do is, I mean, people think that people just turn up off the street with tickets and they sit in the audience. That's not what they want, because it's a debate show where they encourage the audience to participate. So when I've been in the audience, they ring me up and they say, who did you vote for last time? Who are you voting for next time? What's your sexual orientation? What's your religion? You know, what do you think on A, B and C? Because they need to get a balance. So if they're debating the future of the NHS and everyone they speak to is a conservative, that's not going to make for a good debate show. So they need, and I don't know if you know, it's my question time, BBC Big Questions. There were people who got to speak who had all different kind of views. The idea is not to be biased and have this one guy on. It's to have a guy representing one view. And there are people who stand up and have different views within the same show. It's just the way it is. Now, he's non-white, he's a Muslim, he can speak very well, and he's got, you know, a credible position, some might say, as university chaplain. When a producer's rushing to get a topical weekly show together and that guy's available, that is worth its weight in gold. And you know, really, he's not a legitimate voice. So this idea that the BBC's up to shenanigans and just bringing this guy in as part of the establishment, and it also, I struggle to see how the BBC can be run by Zionist overlords and be propagating Muslim obscurantists.
They're playing both sides against the middle, you see. That's what they do. They're very crafty like that.
To some of the suspicions, yes, the audience is selectively chosen, but that's done to the benefit of the discussion. So it's a balance that they usually. I've been called on shows before, and they've actually told me we've got too many people who represent your views on this topic. So we know we'll have to get back to you, and they've not got back to me because there's no point having everyone in the audience who believe the same thing, because it's not going to be a debate, is it?
No, it's just going to be really boring, and they don't want the show to be boring. They want it to be full of different viewpoints. But I just thought it was funny when I saw him on Question Time and he put his hand up and he said, I want you to listen to me, and I want you to listen real good.
He's so arrogant, is he? He does
and
this.
Then all he said was, I've come here with this vicar. And I was like, okay.
Oh, fuck me.
What? He did it. And when he said that, I want you to listen to me, I thought, okay, he's going to try and come up with something really profound. And he didn't.
No, we are the victims. We are the collateral damage. Imagine if I'd have turned up and gone, this is my brown friend. This is my Muslim friend. Look at my little token, whatever, to show that I am not racist or not an extremist or whatever. He tokenized the Church of England there.
Well, I'm sorry, but how low is the bar set that all we're happy for is that people merely condemn violence or blowing shit up, but we don't condemn, views that are abhorrent. We're just more concerned with the fact that, are you killing someone? Are you blowing someone up? No? All right, that's fine then. That's it. And how difficult is it to find people who condemn violence? Not very. No,
and he's also obstructing the process, because I don't know if you saw, there was a Channel 4 interview, and I think that was in Rusholme again.
Yeah, that's what they always do. Oh, we need loads of Muslims. Let's go down to Rusholme.
Yeah. It's not a difficult process, is it? So there's a gentleman talking there, and it can't always be nice every time there's a terrorist act for, to be part of the Muslim community and be told you need to sort this problem out, you specifically. Sure, but there was this one guy speaking a lot of sense. He's like, we as a community do have to do more. We need to find out who these extremists are and report them and work with mosques. And fucking Muhammed Ullah Bobblehead was there again, shaking his head, doing his shaky head routine. He's literally disagreeing with a man saying, actually, I'd like to do more to help. And his viewpoint is, no, we've done enough. We don't need to do anything to help. Even if you want to help, we shouldn't have to. And it's just kind of...
Can you imagine that? Like someone comes up to him, I'm here just to talk about extremism and how to help. No. It's all good.
It's all good. Forget about it.
Sorry.
And he basically clears his throat with like 4 seconds of saying what a terrible attack this was but we Muslims are the collateral damage. He keeps saying we're, the backlash.
For fuck's sake.
And now, bear in mind, he was saying this on Victoria Derbyshire whilst the police were still trying to identify which bits of girl belonged to who at Manchester Arena. They still had people that they hadn't named because the bodies were just in several different pieces and they just couldn't be identified. And he's talking about the collateral damage being the Muslim community because he'd heard that a Muslim had been spat at.
Right, well, that's worse than being blown up to bits.
Yeah, so I think, being spat at is unacceptable. It's horrific.
It is horrific, but to imply that's somehow worse than being blown up.
I've no problem with people worrying about these knock-on issues, but to make that your primary focus.
I mentioned it before as well. Yeah, absolutely. But
he's got a platform, he's got an opportunity to be somebody who can reassure a British public who are deeply suspicious of Muslims at the moment because no one's having a sensible discussion about it. Anyone who wants to talk about it sensibly is called an Islamophobe. Anyone who doesn't care about being called a racist or an Islamophobe is usually a crackpot with some bad ideas. And he has an opportunity there to say, this is terrible. We're going to look to try and remove extremists from our communities. We're going to try and attack this idea of suicide bombing and gets you into paradise. Reassuring noises. It's actually so easy to make sense on that issue. I could be a Muslim superstar tomorrow, I reckon, if I converted to the faith, reverted should I say, and decided I wanted to be a talking head on the news. I think I could manage it within a month because it's so easy to make sense.
Muslim community leader than some of these.
Yeah, it's just so easy to make sense on this topic and not be bigoted at the same time. And it just seems unwilling, and we lap it up and we clap at these people, and we like you say,
oh my God, they've condemned killing, hooray!
What a nice guy. Get him on the front row.
Well, like we've said before, there is some anti-Muslim bigotry too. It means, I don't face it directly myself, but whenever I've written something or tweeted, I do get some people just say, "Oh, deport them all."
Deport them all. Where?
Where are you going to deport me?
Send them back to Islamistan. Bradford.
I was born in close. I was born in Bradford. I don't want to be deported there, thank you. But and the thing is, there was an incident, a really horrific incident, in which, in Portland, where a man stabbed a few people to death because they were defending. So there is, and that was completely horrific to read about as well. I couldn't really read that report because it was quite gruesome. So it does happen. People. There are some attacks on Muslims because of the actions of a dickhead like Abadi. But at the same time, if you're saying that an incident of a woman being spat at is somehow worse than being blown up in a concert, then you're an idiot. There's no way. That doesn't even constitute a backlash. I'm sorry, but it does not. People on the whole have not resorted to such attacks. These are a minority of incidents. They're nowhere near on a big scale as someone like Muhammed Ullah would portray them. He, like I said before, he's just a professional victim. He'd like to make out as though Muslims are the biggest victims, and of course Muslims are victims as well, because this suicide bomber would have blown people up regardless. I don't think he would have checked whether everyone was Muslim or not. But on the whole, we live in an accepting society and a tolerant society. I mean, you have people in this country who go around preaching all sorts of horrible things about non-Muslims and the Western lifestyle, and they're free to do that.
Yeah. It's a very tolerant society. I don't see the reality reflected in the hysteria I hear on TV. But it's interesting to note about that Portland attack you just mentioned, which was horrific. But it's interesting because it's been billed everywhere. The headline is anti-Muslim attack, and actually it was 2 non-Muslims that were murdered. They stepped in to intervene, I believe, a Muslim woman who was being harassed by this lunatic. You read his this guy's opinions and views that have been documented online, he's all over the place. He's a white supremacist. 1 minute he's propping up Donald Trump. The next minute he's throwing Nazi salutes. The next minute he's a Bernie Sanders supporter. The next minute he's talking about the superiority of Christianity. The next minute he's trashing all religions. And
but why are we calling him a terrorist? You know?
So he's an absolute lunatic, this guy, and I really just I hope for the most absolute severest sentence that the state can bestow upon him. I'm not sure. I think Portland might have the death penalty, so I'm not in favour of the death penalty, obviously, but I hope justice is served. But it's just interesting that even when there's an attack, when 2 people get killed, which none of them are Muslims, it's still an anti-Muslim attack, which is very interesting to me. I mean, a lot of people are being more objective with it. They're saying he's anti-everything. This guy just seems like he just hates in general. That's his raison d'etre. So it's very sad. But I mean, if you're going to be positive about it, somebody saw 2 men, saw an injustice taking place and tried to do something about it, and they've paid with their lives, unfortunately. But again, that's not the actions of a society that oppresses or doesn't care for their minority citizens.
Exactly, I'd agree with you. But another point I wanted to mention was about our new mayor, Andy Burnham, who's decided only he knows who is and is not a real Muslim.
Yep, he's decreed.
Thanks, Andy.
He's decreed. He's policed the correct rhetoric. We have been corrected. The Ministry of Truth has made a decision on this topic, and he openly said on the BBC's Question Time the other day, we should not say Islamic terrorist, we should not say Muslim terrorist, and he even went one step further and said we shouldn't even say so-called Islamic State, which is amazing to me, because that so-called, for me, is what they put in there to not have to admit that there was a link to Islam. So even that's not good enough anymore. We have to completely whitewash any religious ideological component to this phenomenon, lest we be considered racist or bigoted, and it's just not going to fly anymore. The politicians are now completely out of step with the general public, who Andy Burnham needs to be reminded, don't get their information from politicians. They can read, they can go online, they can make up their own mind whether people like this terrorist suicide bomber in Manchester cared much for religious ideology. Why is it that this is still persisting, do you think, when the public are not buying it anymore?
Because, when we see incidents of terrorism, and it's always young Muslim men or even Muslim women, going off to join ISIS, and we can see that they've justified it in their theology or the teachings of the scriptures. It just doesn't make sense then for people to hear a politician saying, "Oh, it's got nothing to do with religion at all." And then it just makes people think, oh, hang on a minute, these terrorists are saying one thing, and you're saying, don't listen to what they're saying. I know they're saying they're doing it for religious reasons, but we know better.
Mufti Andy Burnham knows better. Yeah.
Yes, Mufti Sheikh Burnham knows so much better. And I just found his appearance on Question Time, especially the way he spoke to Sarah Khan, he was so incredibly patronising. The way he just went, "Oh, for you to imply that ISIS represents Muslims is disgusting." I thought, she did not say that at all. She didn't say that. She was just saying that they're justifying it by theology, and it's not, it's not the interpretation of Islam that I recognise or follow, but it's there. So she's saying it's not something that she believes or follows, but it's there.
It's a plausible one, yeah. It's something we need to address, and that's what I'm saying about going back to how easy it is to have this conversation sensibly. But when you've got non-Muslim men like Andy Burnham shutting her down when she's trying to speak, and let's be honest, from a place of great risk to herself, this is a brave woman speaking up here about this, and to be shut down like that, to me, quite frankly, is disgusting.
Yeah, and then there's a Muslim woman in the audience who was like, "Oh, seems like a non-Muslim knows more about Islam than you." Oh,
yeah.
Whatever.
There was that other girl who became my hero instantly, who spoke up as a Muslim and said, look, we do have a problem with extremism. She called out the Wahhabi influence on some UK Islamic institutions and Wahhabi, Saudi funding and things like that. And she was very, very clear and eloquent, and that takes great risk to do, and it always seems to be the women to me. And I think that explains why a lot of Islamic cultures keep women under the boot, because as soon as they get a voice and on a platform, they tend to bring the whole house of cards down for these men who rule by the book, so to speak.
Yeah, have you noticed how none of these community leaders from Muslim communities are men either? They have all these imams coming out to speak up. Again, no women. You had pictures of the police posting meeting where they went to a mosque to speak to the congregation, which is great. But again, where are the women? Do we not exist? And it's funny how you mentioned that woman on Question Time, because I was on a public forum on Facebook and her mum came on and said this was my daughter. And since she came on, she's been getting a lot of racial abuse.
That's the problem.
From fellow Muslims.
That's ridiculous. A poor girl.
Were saying, oh, she's not a real Muslim. Oh, she's black, though. She's an Uncle Tom sellout.
Coconut.
Yeah.
I only discovered that phrase when I started speaking to ex-Muslims. I had no idea how bad this was. Yeah. But there's a thing that I kind of wanted to touch on, and that's the conversation and how many caveats we have to sneak in whilst talking about Muslims in similar terms to Christians, for instance. So were I to say Christian fundamentalists piss me off, everyone would be like, yeah, of course, Christian fundamentalists would piss you off. Now, if I was to say Muslim fundamentalists piss me off, all of a sudden, from all angles, I'm getting, whoa, not all Muslims. It's not fair to judge the many by the actions of a few. And all of a sudden, I don't think there's any context you can put this in where someone's not going to assume you're attacking everybody who comes under the banner of Islam.
Yeah, you have to put a disclaimer out there, like before you say something, and even I have to bloody do it, because people have a go at me as well. They're like, oh, but you just said that, but it's not all Muslims. And I get it, but I only have 140 characters to play with on Twitter. I can't be wasting that on saying, but not all Muslims do this, but blah 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 blah.
Well, I think I've got my vitriol for Muhammed Ullah out of my system, and Andy Burnham is just a lost cause. I'm going to let you decide who takes the crown as this week's ASLAN award winner.
Oh God, it's a tough one because they've both pissed me off so much this week.
One has significantly more influence, though, doesn't he? Muhammed Ullah, quite clearly, with his media superstar, getting more news time, FaceTiming than the Mayor of Manchester right now.
Would you say he has, or what about the new Mayor of Manchester? Wouldn't he? Shouldn't he know better, or is he just...
He's pandering, isn't he? He's pandering. That's what he's doing. He's playing to the Muslim vote, which is something I think Labour have been guilty of for quite some time. And really, we need to have a more sensible discussion about it. But I mean, it's ignorance. I actually do believe... I don't think he's lying. I think he believes what he's saying.
Yeah, he's not a bad person. No. I have met him. He's not a nasty person at all. But I think, when I've heard what he said, it's clear that he is a politician. He'll listen to everyone and decide what's a vote winner and what will be most popular. And it seems in this case he's just been listening to certain Muslim voices that have probably been telling him which people to listen to, which people not to listen to. And it's clear that he's not listened to someone like Sarah Khan.
No.
And they talked about the government's prevent strategy, and everyone goes on about how controversial it is, but it's only controversial because if you keep labeling something controversial, it becomes controversial. If you keep saying the controversial prevent strategy, that's it.
It's controversial. Well, in the Green Party manifesto, they call it xenophobic. They want to abolish the xenophobic prevent strategy.
Yeah, but they're never going to come to power, so don't give a shit. Whereas, Labour could easily come to power and I don't think I could ever vote for Labour, to be honest. I don't know if I could even vote Conservative because I don't agree with some of their policies. So
yes,
I definitely don't know who to vote for.
I'm politically homeless at the moment. I'm kind of looking at the Lib Dems and kind of...
Yeah, but they'll never come to power, so it'll just be a wasted vote.
Let's talk about this, actually, because I've not spoke about the general election, and I'll explain where I am and you can explain where you are. North Manchester, working class, it's always been Labour for me. There's no way I can vote Labour under Corbyn. I just can't bring myself to do it. There's something reflexive that makes me gag when I think about voting Tory. And I think I concede that is part due to indoctrination, just the northern parts. I was out with my dad the other night, took him out for something to eat, and he was talking about voting Labour, and his main reason was Thatcher. So he's not quite over that yet. But I can't bring myself to vote the Tories. I don't think they look out for the vulnerable. I don't necessarily think they look out for the working class. So I'm leaning towards the Lib Dems because I think they have a lot of good policies on faith schools and other things, and they've talked about legalising cannabis, so there's a winner right there. But I've got another... See, this is when you start getting tactical and silly about it because you start overthinking. I'm thinking the only thing that could oust Jeremy Corbyn now is an absolute Tory landslide, and maybe that could be a good thing to, keep the Tories in to get through the Brexit process. Why destabilise at this point in the game? Get Corbyn out and rebuild the Labour Party grassroots to something that's actually meaningful to most of the electorate. So am I wasting a vote by voting the Lib Dems because they're not getting in? Am I, by voting Lib Dems, increasing the chance that Corbyn's getting in? Am I evil for throwing my hat in the ring with the Tories? Should I just ignore all the problems I have with Corbyn and go with Labour? Help me, Iram.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm much help because I'm kind of in the same predicament as you. I have seen some Lib Dem policies and I think they actually don't sound too bad.
Why do you vote for Lib Dems? They didn't sound too bad.
They're alright, Actually, no, you're right. They have some very progressive policies, and they're not either tax too low or tax too high. They seem to get it right. The
middle ground, aren't they? I think.
Yeah, they do get it right on quite a lot of issues. And as far as I'm aware, they're not for abolishing tuition fees. And I'm sorry, but when I was a student, I obviously disagreed with increasing tuition fees. But when I think about it now, I think, well, why shouldn't you have to pay for it? More and more people are going to university. You can't just give everybody free education.
Someone's got to pay for it, haven't they?
So someone has to pay for it, and you're not going to pay back until you earn a certain amount. And I think that's right. For me, the threshold was way too low. For me, it was a case of I had to be earning 15,000 to start paying it back.
Oh, wow.
I think. Yeah, that's when I went to uni. So I think that was too low. I think the 21,000 mark was just about right, to be honest.
That's the national average, isn't it? Supposedly in the UK, national average wage.
Yeah. So I think in a way the Lib Dems got it right there. But it's unlikely that they'll ever get to power. I mean, they only have all their MPs could fit into one car, basically. So it is. I'm sorry, but it is a wasted vote. The reality is that you're choosing between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, and I can't vote for Jeremy Corbyn. I can't. I just can't bring myself to do it. The guy is not. He's not a leader. He's not a leader, and he doesn't look like somebody who wants to be leader of the party. He just looks like someone who just got handed the leadership and thought, oh shit, my leader now.
He turned Labour into a far left protest movement as far as I'm concerned.
He is. It's just a far left protest movement. They don't seem serious about getting into power. But then on the other hand, you've got the Conservatives. Some of their policies I don't agree with. And I don't agree with Theresa May's plans on faith schools. No. I think faith schools will do more damage to this country. I think both Corbyn and May are very lackluster. There's nothing particularly inspiring about either of them, really, is there? No charisma. So I'm...
Like Clinton versus Clinton.
So it's very... I'm very... I am conflicted. I'm not so sure who to vote for, but I think in a way you're right. If a Tory landslide is the way to make Labour really think about what kind of party they are, then I think it's got to be Tory. And I know a lot of people probably
You Tory scum.
Yeah, bring it on. I don't care. I'll take the mud. I don't care.
Well, it's funny how many of these polls that were showing Theresa May running away with it were just Tory propaganda. Now the gap's closed a little bit. They're significant to a lot of these Corbyn fans. All of a sudden, we should have a look at this. All of a sudden, which is strange. But I'm getting really pissed off with the Corbyn fans who refuse to concede the fact that Labour's doing so poorly is predominantly due to Corbyn's general lacklustre effect on the general electorate. People don't trust him. People don't like him. People, I think, who are going to vote Labour are already loud and proud saying they're going to vote Labour. There are so many secret Tories who aren't on social media, who aren't going about with, I'm with Theresa May banners everywhere, who are going to turn up and put the cross on Tory on election day.
Yeah, it's the same with the EU referendum. There are a lot of people who didn't want to admit that they were in favour of leaving the EU because they were going to get a lot of abuse thrown at them. And I guess maybe it was the same with the US presidential elections. Not many people were going to admit that they were going to vote for Trump. And I guess maybe the same is the case here. The gap has closed a little bit, which is worrying. But yeah, I'm sorry, but Labour under Corbyn is a joke. I don't think Corbyn is the cause of it. I think he's a symptom of the problems Labour has in general. They're the ones, his party are the ones who chose him as leader. And I wonder if a bollocking on election day is what will really
a good bollocking at the polls. Good bollocking at the polls. Perfect.
Bollocking at the polls. I think I'm hoping that's what will really make them change their minds and oust him. But I don't know. He's been hailed as some sort of martyr, and if anything goes wrong, it's the fault of the media. It's the media.
Yeah.
And what is with Owen Jones? Is he running Labour?
I don't know what's happening. I think he might make a better politician, to be honest. I think he'd probably make a better Labour leader than Corbyn. I'm not really a massive fan of what Owen's got to say either. But I mean, I'm going to swear off making political predictions now because I was wrong about Brexit. Never saw that. I mean, I went with the polls. The polls said it wasn't going to happen, so you tend to think you're going with the best information. I didn't think Donald Trump would get in, and again, I went with what the polls seem to suggest. And I've completely...
You think we could have Prime Minister Corbyn?
Oh, I don't even want to think about it.
Now think about that when you're putting your cross in the ballot box.
Yeah.
Who would you rather have?
Yeah.
Who would you rather have addressing you when there's been a terrorist attack?
So I'm on record saying that Corbyn's never getting in. He'll never be PM. So we'll see how this goes. I think this might be the end of my political predictions. That's the general election pretty much covered. I believe you wanted to talk about something which I missed. I've got to catch up on this, but it's the Three Girls TV show, which I believe is a kind of docudrama type thing. Oh, it's not a documentary, is it? It's an acted piece, isn't it?
It was a drama based on the real case of the girls involved in the Rochdale grooming cases. So it's basically it's based on their accounts, but obviously they've protected their identities, given them new names in this drama. As some of our listeners will know, a couple of years ago, there were men in Rochdale who were convicted of, several offences related to grooming underage girls. 9 men. They're all Muslim and they're mostly Pakistani. 1 or 2 weren't. And this drama is based on what happened to the girls and how they became sexually abused, and how the social services, police, basically authorities in general, did absolutely nothing to help them. And if you haven't seen the drama, it's a 3-part drama, you have to go and watch it, because even though it's harrowing to watch, it was so difficult to watch. But it just wakes you up to the reality of what actually went on there, and why these girls suffered, and why they didn't get any justice for such a long time because nobody wanted to believe them. There was a fear there of political correctness as well.
I mean, that was in a lot of the official government reports, wasn't it? There was a fear of being considered racist for tackling this problem, which just blows my mind.
Part of it. I think that's certainly part of it, but I think the bigger part of it is the fact that, police officers just saw them as dirty white slags who just chose to live that type of lifestyle. And you've got to remind yourself that they were children, they were underage girls who were being abused, but they weren't seen as underage girls. They were just seen as prostitutes. It's just incredible that they didn't see them as victims. One of the girls was accused of basically being a pimp and being a co-abuser. She was actually 15, and although she was helping the gang introduce them to other young girls, it's not like she was doing it because she was some sort of abuser. It's because she did it because she was genuinely scared of what could happen to her as well. But it was a fantastically made drama, which really tells you the story from the victim's point of view. What it must have been like for them and what they went through, what their families went through. And if anyone hasn't watched it, I'd really recommend you to go and watch it right now. It was a brilliant drama.
Yeah, I think I've been putting it off on purpose. I think reading a lot of the details of them cases, it is quite harrowing what they went through. I mean, I assume it pulls no punches. I assume it's quite hard hitting. Yeah,
it's just doesn't shy away from it at all. And there's a court scene in the final episode, where the men are brought to justice, and it's based on actual court transcripts as well. And it's incredible that these two girls, they're cross-examined by all of their barristers. These young girls are cross-examined by 9 separate barristers and basically called liars. I think they've changed the law on that you can't have so many people cross-examine, victims of sexual abuse now. And I think that's right. The way they were treated was just appallingly. And you have to keep reminding yourself as well that they are just children. They weren't treated as vulnerable children. They were just treated like they were young prostitutes who just chose this lifestyle. And towards the end, at the aftermath of the court case, there was a scene in which it shows the actor playing Nazir Afzal, who's on a panel with other people in the community. They go in Rochdale, and obviously people in Rochdale are saying, "Oh, this is nothing to do with this. Doesn't represent Rochdale. We're not all perverts and paedophiles and groomers. We didn't know anything about this." And then in the same sentence, the man who says that also says, "Yeah, well, our girls aren't hanging around street corners, with their boobs hanging out, wearing short skirts, blah,
Jesus
blah,
Christ.
blah." In response to why, I think the question he was asked was in response to why our girls aren't abused or anything like that. But they are, because I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that one of the groomers actually was abusing a Pakistani girl for many, many years. So it does happen to Pakistani girls. The difference is that obviously issues around shame and honor, they're just less likely to want to come out and be open about it. Well, not many victims want to come out and be open about something like this anyway. But if you're from of a Pakistani background, you're less likely to speak out about it. And
there's a lot of stigma, isn't there, about
there's so much stigma. And I think that's what frustrates me when people talk about this case and they just want to make it an issue about Asian men v white girls. And I'm not saying that is not a factor. It definitely is. They were seen as trash. They were seen as little slags because they came from, broken homes, or they were allowed to stay out nights, so they were seen as, easy to target. But at the same time, I've no doubt they were abusing their own girls at the same time. I think the problem that I have is when people just want to simplify this issue, and you can't do that.
We have managed to bang on for nearly an hour and a half, and we barely got through any of the things we wanted to talk about. And my bladder's protesting vehemently. Well, it's been a pleasure as always, and I certainly hope it'd be nice to come on here. I know this is a daft thing to say to a podcast. It'd be nice to have nothing to talk about. Do a quick 20 minutes one week, but I can't see that being the reality in the foreseeable future, unfortunately.
No. Unfortunately not.
All right, thank you very much. Where can people find SEDAR again? Let us know quickly.
It is www.sedar.org.
What an unusual, peculiar word that is. Does that, to my mind, that sounds like... I think, I'm sure I recall that's Persian for voice.
Why, yes it is, Stephen.
Bingo, 10 points. Multicultural motherfucker I am. Alright, Iram, take care. Speak to you soon.
See ya.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Taking the Myth, and a huge thank you to my excellent co-host, Iram Ramzan. You can keep up to date on the podcast at gspellchecker.com. You can also find some great writing by Iram and her fellow contributors over at sedar.org, SEDAA.org. Think we've all learned something here today?